Ancient Egypt. My question today is, what parts of American contemporary culture have their roots in ancient Egyptian culture? When you think about ancient Egypt, a few things probably come to mind right away. The pyramids, the pharaohs, the Sphinx, and a few others. But I'm going to dive into the things that they left behind that have found their way into our everyday lives and our culture. A few of these things include mathematics, the alphabet, paper and writing, surgery, and even bowling. The first and probably the most remarkable thing the Egyptians left behind were mathematics. The earliest records of geometry are from Egypt. They had geometry specialists called Aripendaptes. They used ropes to calculate the area of land, and eventually their techniques were passed on to the Greeks. Egyptians also worked out efficient ways of performing multiplication and division. While they had various ways to perform such calculations, Egyptians used a more computation-friendly method that involved doubling numbers, a technique we still use in modern-day culture.
Don't overpay for Adidas. Wikibuy can save you money. It's a browser extension and automatically applies coupon codes to your shopping cart.
To find the product of two different numbers, the ancient Egyptians used a form of multiplication by using doubling. To show how the ancient Egyptians used the doubling method, we are going to use the example 25 multiplied by 32. The first thing that you have to do is write your problem out horizontally. The first number we will consider our first column, and the second number we will consider our second column. Underneath the first column, you always write the number 1, regardless of the number that is at the top of the column. After writing the number 1, you always double the number 1, and you always get the number 2. And then you double the number 2, which is 4, and then you double 4, which is 8, and you double 8, which is 16. You must stop doubling when you know that the next number would exceed the value at the top of your column. And in this case, the number at the top of our column is 25, so we may not exceed the number 25. At the top of our second column, we have the number 32. Whatever number you have at the top of your second column, you must rewrite that number and start doubling that number. Because we only doubled 5 numbers in our first column, you may only double 5 numbers in the second column. So first, we are going to rewrite 32. We double 32, and that is 64. We double 64, and that is 128. 128 doubled is 256. And 256 doubled is 512. The next step is we must go back to our first column and locate the numbers that would have a sum of the number at the top of our column. So we have to locate numbers with the sum of 25. Sometimes you may have more than 2 numbers in that column that will add up to the number at the top of your column. The numbers that add up to 25 are the numbers 16, 8, and 1. After you have located the numbers that total the number at the top of your column, you must look directly to the right of the numbers that you circled. It is those numbers, when added, that will give you the answer of your problem. Adding 32, 256, 512 will give us our answer. And the sum of these three values is 800. So 25 multiplied by 32 is equal to 800. Let's try another example. In this example, we are going to multiply 15 times 62. As always, start by writing the number 1 in the first column and start doubling the number 1. But remember, we are not allowed to exceed the number 15. So 1, 2, 4, and 8 are the only numbers that we may write underneath the number 15. If we were to double 8, that would exceed 15. In the second column, we rewrite the number 62. 62 doubled is 124, 124 doubled is 248, and 248 doubled is 496. Next, we go back to the first column and figure out what combination of numbers will add up to the number 15. In this case, all four numbers add up to the number 15. Therefore, we must add up all of the numbers directly to the right of all four of those numbers. So we're going to add up these numbers together, and in the first column, we have a total of 20. In the next column, we have a total of 23. And in the last column, we have a total of 9. So the product of 15 and 62 is 930. And that is how you multiply numbers using the ancient Egyptian method of doubling.
If you shop on Amazon,
Egyptians also invented basic fractions. Most had one on top called a unit fraction, and more complex fractions such as 4/7, but those had to be represented by adding up several unit fractions. The next thing that has translated into contemporary American culture is the use of an alphabet. Of course, we don't use any Egyptian alphabets today, but the idea of a phonetic alphabet where each symbol represents a sound rather than a whole word came from Egypt. Egyptian hieroglyphics use a symbol for each word, but 24 unilateral signs were phonetic to pronounce loanwords and foreign words. Due to complex nature of hieroglyphics, people had to be trained to use them. So Semitic people within Egypt crafted a 22-letter alphabet based on unilateral signs. It's known as the Pro-Sinaitic alphabet. It was wholly phonetic, with each letter used to construct a larger word, like our own alphabet. Next is paper and writing. While the Egyptians didn't discover the paper we use today, papyrus was a huge step up from carving words into stone. Both in terms of ease of writing and being lighter to carry around. The Egyptians discovered papyrus and the reed pen so they could actually write on it in 3000 BC. China would invent paper in 100 BC using mulberry bark and hemp rags, using a method that would evolve into the technique we use today. While Egypt's grand invention fell out of use eventually, it gave us the world idea of moving away from stone tablets. Next up is surgery. The Egyptians were one of the first cultures to have been found keeping medical records. To go along with their medical records, the Egyptians hold the title for the first civilization to discover surgical tools. They were found in the tomb of Kar, who was known as the physician of the palace and the keeper of the secrets of kings. Kept next to Kar's head were several bronze surgical tools, each of which sported a hole that seemed as if it had been intended to be hung up on a hook. Egyptians were now writing down their methods and procedures. We can also see written logs of surgery. They detail the removal of cysts and tumors, but more major surgeries that are performed today were probably not performed back then. Egyptians played a very similar game to modern-day bowling. Archaeologist William Matthews Flinders Petrie found a child's grave containing crude pins and small marbles and concluded it might have been related to bowling, but there was no proof that they were used for such a purpose. More solid evidence can be found in a room near a residential area in the 2nd century. It featured several balls with a lane and holes in the middle. Some of the balls could be fit through the center hole, while the others were far too big. Archaeologists believed that it was a competitive game. One person tried to bowl the smaller ball into the hole, while someone on the other side of the lane tried to knock the ball off course with the larger ones. Looking back at Egyptians' culture, it's amazing to see how much of it has made it into our own culture after thousands of years. Obviously, most of their practices and ways have fallen out of use, but a special few have found their way to stand the test of time and had major influence on our modern day culture.